So I was cleaning my bookshelves the other day, and it occurred to me how many of the books that I own that I haven't actually read. And that's no good. You should read the books that you have. Uh, but so far, the kind of haphazard way that I had been going about reading them clearly wasn't working, since over half of them I haven't read. And so I thought to myself that it might be best if maybe I had an organized way of doing so. And so I reorganized the books so that they went from A to Z by author's last name, and I thought, okay, start at the beginning, go to the end, very easy. But I didn't want to just do it on my own because I wanted to talk about the books too, and so I tried to recruit some of my friends to help me to discuss them in a book club, and they very politely but firmly said no. And so, in order to not just give up on the endeavor, I decided to try making these videos in order to keep myself disciplined and actually reading the books. And perhaps somebody might be interested in hearing what I have to say about them and talking about them with me. So, I hope you enjoy. So, the first book in this A to Z series is Jerlayne by Lynn Abbey, and I know it's backwards for you, but I'll try to put a right side around version up on the screen. Uh, and I like to look up the books that I'm reading beforehand so that I get an idea of what to expect out of them. And I was really surprised about this book in particular, because there is almost no information about it. If you look it up, you'll see a handful of listings for it on used book sites. Uh, there's maybe 15 reviews at the time that I looked on Goodreads, so not very much there. There's one website that reviewed it and called it trash. And then there's Lynn Abbey's actual author website, which I don't think has been updated in, I don't know, 15, 20 years at least. Uh, and I want to talk about the website, though, Lynn Abbey's website, because if you look on it, Jerlayne is only mentioned one time. It does not have a link to where to purchase it, like others of Abby's books, and there's not a blurb or anything. It's just Jerlayne was written by Lynn Abbey in 1999, and that's it. This is not an auspicious beginning to the A to Z. I bought this book from a used bookstore in Detroit, the John K. King used bookstore, very big bookstore, a very cool bookstore. But I just saw it on a shelf, said sure, why not? And that's how I got it. And it turns out that that was really cool because nobody has read this book, and I think that's neat that I own a book that almost nobody has read, possibly including the author. So, um, I won't keep it. I'm not going to keep you in suspense. It's pretty bad, and there's a reason nobody's read it. So, yeah. So, I now need to talk about the plot. And for those of you who are worried about spoilers, I have two things to say to you. One, I'm very sorry, but it is a necessity to discuss the plot of these books in order to talk about them with any sort of intelligence or thoroughness. I know that there are channels that try to remain spoiler free, but it has been my opinion that when they talk about those books, it is in a very surface level way, and I'd like to get more into the weeds with these books. And so to do that, I have to talk about the plot. The second thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that this book is not worth reading. Don't spend your time reading it because it's bad. And so the spoilers don't matter because you shouldn't read it. With that said, I'll get into the plot now. This book is about the elf woman named Jerlayne, very apt name. And it is about her life and how she learns about the world in which she lives and what happens because of that. She lives in a land in a immortal realm called Fairy, where elves and dwarves and goblins and dragons and whatnot, they live, and it is separate from the mortal world. The mortal realm is the real world, like the real world. It's not a fictionalized version of the real world, it is the actual world. I mean, it is slightly fictionalized because there are still elves, but it is effectively the real world. Not very much really happens outside of the world building aspects of this book. This book is 520 pages of world building, with very little actual plot happening. But I'll have to talk about the world building to a certain extent. So the book opens up with Jerlayne shaping her chain. In the world of fairy, elven women have the ability to shape the items around them through magic. And a big one is iron, their ability to shape iron. And in order for an elven woman to be considered an adult, she has to shape a 20-link iron chain, which Jerlayne is very able to do and is the youngest elf to ever do it. I think it says she's like 54 or something like that when she does it. So she's not young, but young for an elf. Elves are being immortal. She then gets married to a man named Aulowden. And they go and they start a homestead within Fairy. And the homestead is populated by gnomes and dwarves. And everything's good for a while. Aulowden and Jerlayne have several children, and in the land of Fairy, children have a chance to, instead of being elves, they can become one day, just magically, they turn into gnomes or dwarves, or sometimes other magical creatures, like dragons and that sort of thing. And this happens for a while. Jerlayne and her husband have several children, and all of these children become other creatures. They don't stay elves. And this upsets Jerlayne, and she gets very depressed. And eventually she goes to her mother and she asks, why aren't my children being elves? And Jerlayne's mother tells her the big secret of elven women, which is that elven women cannot have elven children with elven men. Elven women have to travel to the mortal realm and have relations with mortals in order to become pregnant with elves. This is a very weird turn in the book, and it happens about 200 pages in. And up until this point, nothing has happened. And then all of a sudden, boom, by the way, the only way for elves to reproduce is through infidelity. And that is just a choice. A bold choice. And I think one that could be interesting in a better book, but it is not something that I was expecting. Certainly not. But that isn't, again, more world building. Because you might think, oh, that's the plot. The plot revolves around uh, her dealing with the fallout of cheating on her husband. And no, not really. That's not what the book is about. Off to the side are the goblins. Now the goblins are warlike creatures. They're the only creatures in fairy that uh, are permitted to be violent. So they carry weapons and they protect the elves from magical enemies. As it turns out, there is a whole other world where the goblins actually live, because the goblins don't live in fairy and they don't live in mortal. They live in their own goblin world that does not have a name. It's just the goblin world. And they fight amongst each other in clans, and that's it. As it happens, Jerlayne finds out. She starts talking to the goblins because elves and goblins don't really talk to each other. But Jerlayne talks to her goblin, the goblin that protects her homestead. And it comes out that actually the goblins don't protect the elves, but rather they keep them as almost as animals. They use them as currency in order to say that they're more powerful than the other goblins. It's never explained why goblins do this. There's no feasible reason for them to do this. They don't get money or power or anything from the elves. They just do it. It's just what goblins do, I guess. But there's a large goblin war brewing where the goblins are fighting, and some goblins want to kill the elves. These are the bad goblins. And the good goblins, of whom Jerlayne's goblin is one of them, they want to protect the elves, and they want to work with the elves, and instead of owning elves, just kind of like be friends with the elves. So far, so good. The and I needed to explain all of that before the rest of this makes sense, I guess, because that again is all world building, not really plot. So here the plot starts. Jerlayne goes to the mortal realm, and she meets a man named Cuz, and she has relations with Cuz, and gets pregnant, and that's how she has an elven child. But it turns out that Cuz is actually the son of a goblin who had accidentally traveled to mortal and had relations with a human woman, and that woman had Cuz, C-U-Z, just so we're clear. His name is Cuz, C-U-Z. Because of this, Cuz has some magical properties to him, which gets found out by a secret, I guess, quasi-government agency. I don't know. They're evil scientists. They would just trademark evil scientists, run by Cuz's uncle, and they capture Cuz, and they are running experiments on him. Jerlayne, because she is now like magically attached to Cuz, feels that something's wrong with him and goes into the mortal realm, sees what's happening, and saves Cuz by bringing him back into the fairy realm. This causes some issues for everybody because it turns out that because the secret gets out, right? That actually elven women have, for all of time, been traveling into the mortal realm, having affairs with mortals, and then passing off the children to their elven husbands, because this has been a big secret. This is horrible. With that secret, the goblins admit that they have been farming elves as well. And then the book ends with everybody finding out all the secrets and everybody just kind of being chill with the secrets. That's the end of the book. Nothing happens. As I said, it's 520-page novel that is just world building, no plot. Nothing happens. Jerlayne does nothing throughout the entire book. Nothing happens. Well, she brings Cuz into the fairy realm, and that is the end of what she does as a character. The title character of a novel does nothing. Anyway, this is why I told you it wouldn't matter if there were spoilers, because there's nothing to spoil. It's all lead up to something that doesn't happen. The book just ends. Nothing more to it. It just comes to an end in a very disappointing manner. So for this next section, it's a little more academic is probably putting it too far, but a little more technical. So I'm gonna have to read more from my script than I was before. Yes, I do have a script for this, but if it seems like I'm reading it, is because I am, and I do apologize. So, what is a plot? It seems like a very simple question. It's the chain of events in a narrative that links the beginning of a story with the end. And it would certainly fit the initial definition to be found in our very handy Dictionary of Literary Terms and Theory, which states that a plot is the plan, design, scheme, or pattern of events in a play, poem, or work of fiction, and further, the organization of incident and character in such a way as to induce curiosity and suspense in the spectator or reader. Certainly, under this definition, the plot of Jerlayne, as I just described it, fits the definition. There is a pattern of events, it is a work of fiction, and the reader is undoubtedly curious as to what will happen next. Or at least I was. Despite my negativity, I did find myself to be interested in what would happen. It's just that nothing happened, as it turns out. A better definition of plot, though, is given by E.M. Forrester in his work Aspects of a Novel, where he says, "We have defined a story as a narrative of events arranged in their time sequence. A plot is also a narrative of events, the emphasis falling on causality. The king died and the queen died is a story. The king died and then the queen died of grief is a plot. The time sequence is preserved, but the sense of causality overshadows it. Or again, the queen died, no one knew why until it was discovered that it was through grief at the death of the king. This is a plot with a mystery in it, a form capable of high development. It suspends the time sequence, it moves as far away from the story as its limitations will allow." Under this definition, we see that it isn't good enough just to have a sequence of events that occur. It isn't good enough that A happens and then B, then C. A, B, and C must be linked together in a coherent manner, preferably in an interesting manner, but it is the causality which turns the series of events into a plot. So now, if we apply this definition to the plot of Jerlayne, as I've tried to do so above, we can see that the novel barely has any plot at all. It is true that there are a series of events, all linked together by Jerlayne, the character, experiencing them, but they aren't causally related. Jerlayne becomes an adult, does not cause Jerlayne to get married, which in turn does not cause Jerlayne to discover that elven women have to sleep with mortal men in order to birth more elves, and that does not cause Jerlayne to discover the goblins keep elves as cattle, and none of that causes the war between the goblins. No doubt one could connect all of these facts into a causal linked story, and perhaps you're doing so now, but that isn't the novel that Lynn Abbey has given us. There isn't any through line which leads us from one event to the next. Rather, we are given a series of unrelated events in the life of an elf, which may or may not be interesting. But is it a plot? Under the first definition, yes, but under the Forrester definition, I would say no. But perhaps there is a sense of causation happening, not a direct causation, but an indirect one. Harrison Demchick, writing on the Jane Friedman blog, discusses how, in some books, the cause and effect sequence that makes up a plot may not be so obvious in literary fiction as it is in genre fiction. And though Jerlayne is genre fiction, perhaps the more loose definition to be found in literary fiction would be more appropriate. He states, the causation, then, is not in the direct plot connection between cause and effect, but rather cause and effect over time as reflected in small but meaningful shifts in character. Jerlayne is most definitely not a work of literary fiction, but nonetheless, perhaps this character-focused type of plot was what was intended. It makes sense, given that the primary focus is on Jerlayne, the character, and her understanding of the world around her. It seems plausible that Lynn Abbey's intention with the novel was to write a plot less in the way of traditional fantasy, and given the number of subversive world-building elements that are present, I think it possible that it was her intention, but the best laid plans of mice and authors often go awry, as they say, because Jerlayne, as a character, never changes throughout the entirety of the 500 pages. In the beginning of the book, we see Jerlayne, the character, is a headstrong young elf whose only goal in life is to get away from what she perceives as her overbearing mother. She chafes against what she perceives as the lies that pervade fairy and sees her mother as the font of those lies. At the end of the book, she is still a headstrong young elf who now wants to get away from her mother, both literally and figuratively, in the person of the goblin chief priestess. She still hates lies to the point that she admitted to her husband that she has had multiple affairs, and so has every elven woman, and throughout the book claims that she has changed fairy for the better. There's no real evidence of that, other than now the elves learn to read, something that they couldn't do before. Perhaps I'm being too harsh. Maybe it isn't that there's no plot. Maybe it's just that the attempt at plot fails so significantly that it just feels like there isn't one. Either way, Jerlayne's biggest failing is its plot, and the way that, despite everything that seems to happen in the book, how none of it really connects together or affects the character is in any meaningful way. So, with all that said, I don't want to be wholly negative. I mean, the book isn't, exclusively bad. It was good enough that I finished a 500-page book. So I did want to mention some things that I did like about it. I genuinely do, despite it being kind of out of left field, I do think the idea of the elves having to have affairs with mortals to create more elves, I do think that's an interesting concept. Like, I think that in a better book, a book that dealt more with fidelity, about the relationships between a man and a wife and his wife, uh, in a book that really delved into that over the course of 1,000-year-long marriage, I think that could be a very interesting concept. And really I liked the promise of it, even though it went nowhere as it turns out. I did find myself interested in it, and I did think that it was a good premise, and I appreciated that. That's something that I liked about it. I also, I don't know. I kind of liked the Jerlayne as a character. She wasn't the most interesting. She's kind of a bland character, an audience stand-in, but she was okay. She's not the worst character I've ever read. Again, there's so many things that happen in this book that if they were in a better book, I think it could have been, I think it could have been at least decent. If you were to tie them better together into a more coherent plot, I think you could have had a very good book. Like, this book is not without merit. It has decent parts to it, and I do think it's worth noting that. Like, it's not, this is not a meritless book. This has some decent ideas in it, albeit they don't work. And I think if given another pass at it, I don't know about Lynn Abbey, but because I've never read any of her other books, but certainly I could definitely see this in more capable hands. This world, this kind of outline being used to make a better book. And I do think it's worth noting that. Overall, though, I do find that, having now read the first book in what will be a very long series of books, this is a rather inauspicious start. Uh, but I do look forward to the next book, which will be Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which I have read before. I read it in high school, and I look forward to seeing how that turns out. So, until then, thank you for watching, and I hope you can enjoy these videos, and I hope you, if you have anything to say, by all means, please leave a comment. Thank you.